Good morning. It's Sunday, June 7th. Now I'm going to mention the names of three women, and most of you won't have any idea who they are. The first one is Alicia Garza. She's a writer. And Patrice Coulers, who's a teacher and an artist and gay. And Opal Tometi, who's a community organizer. Now, all of these women are well educated and they have fine careers that they're working at right. But they're not well known. And there were and still are activists. And they actually were the ones who founded Black Lives Matter. Now, later on, you'll understand why I'm making a point about the anonymity of these three women. Now, BLM, everything seems to end up with an initial.
What?
BLM is an international human rights movement. Although most of its activity seems to take place in the United States, that campaigns against violence and systematic racism towards black people. So BLM regularly holds protests speaking out against many offensive activities that are perpetrated against people of color, black Americans. So for the past 5 years, BLM has attempted to tackle the systematic racism present in the U.S., which denigrates the lives of its black citizens. Therefore, there are many that see BLM as the new civil rights movement. But there's a distinct difference between their approach to winning the battle, so to speak. The civil rights movement from 54 to 65 demanded basic equality for African Americans. BLM is focused on police abuse of African Americans. So I think it's wise to take a look at the similarities and differences between the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. The civil rights movement was an inclusive movement. They invited many different people to be part of that movement, whereas the BLM movement tends to be exclusive, tends to want people of color. The civil rights movement was a nonviolent movement, whereas BLM is aggressive. It's an aggressive movement. And you can see what goes on with the looting and everything. And here's one of the big things that was the difference. The civil rights movement had a great leader. The young people in both movements are being criticized as being too militant. Maybe that's because they're young and they have a cause and they feel it. So that's okay. The civil rights rallies and protests tended to be quieter. But in spite of that, there are many people who still consider that BLM is a continuation of where the civil rights movement left off. Now, it may be similar in some ways, but in some other ways, it's very, very different. Maybe it's too early to make a judgment on BLM because it's only been around for 5 years, where civil rights lasted 10 years or 12 years. The leadership structure of the two movements is very different. Black Lives Matter has categorically rejected the civil rights movements of a hierarchical style of leadership, maybe because it was formed by three women and a straight-back male at the top giving orders wasn't the way they wanted to do things. As a result, BLM is highly decentralized and unstructured. And we can blame that mainly, I guess, on the tools of technology, particularly social media and Twitter. They have made it easy for a bottom up insurgency led by ordinary people. And that has displaced the top down approach of the old guard civil rights organizations. So you're having people now who email each other and decide that they're having a rally at a certain place, and maybe a different person speaks up and leads the rally all the time. It seems like there's no cohesive thread running through this organization all the time, where somebody's definitely in charge. So there's no, in my mind, no central view, no real goal, and therefore I think this movement is bound to fail. I don't think that you can win if you have no focus, no criteria, no standard for excellence. If everybody can be a boss and a leader, you end up with very different versions of protesting, many variations. And it gives freedom to those who believe in the more outrageous patterns of behavior, such as destruction and burning and, of course, looting. And all of those activities tend to minimize the message you are trying to deliver. Most people who would support the movement will turn their back on you. They don't want to be associated with criminals. And that's the big problem with the Black Lives Movement. It's difficult to distinguish the legitimate activists from the mob actors who burn and loot. So I think they have a long way to go to get their act together. And that's all I want to say this morning. So I'll see you tomorrow.